In 2007, Greg Heffley started middle school and decided to write about his day-to-day life in his journal to give his future fans a look into his younger years after he became famous. In 2026, that boy is still writing about his tween life in that same town, same middle school, and same house. And with at least one book coming out per year, that means Greg has now officially been stuck in secondary education for over 19 years. Now, just for the record, I know Diary of Wimpy Kid is essentially a cartoon and fiction, so time is a flat circle, and nothing ever really happens in these books, but it's just fun to theorize, okay? This video isn't supposed to be taken seriously or like I'm trying to get a deeper meaning to the Wimpy Kid books. It's just fun to look at some of the smaller details, that's all. One of the many explanations for how Greg has written so many journals is he's lied time and time again about the events in his life. After all, we know Greg isn't exactly a reliable narrator, and some of the things in the newer books are so ridiculous, there's no way they could have happened in the real world. So in today's video, I'm going to do a deep dive into the many lies Greg Heffley has told throughout the years, and hopefully tally them all up. Okay, so the idea for this video kinda came up with me thinking about how the earlier Wimpy Kid books were fairly realistic. Sure, they had their moments of absurdity, but there's really nothing in them to suggest that such a story couldn't happen in real life, and that was part of the charm of the earlier entries. But nowadays I got things like walking pigs with pants, robot principals, and an RV serving as a strong and functional bridge. Here's the thing, while there are some things in these books that are obviously lies, there's a good amount of stuff that could have happened in real life but aren't necessarily realistic, so I'll also bring up potential exaggerations because, again, they could have happened, but the likelihood of such an event would be so low that Greg maybe made up some details to make the story more interesting. Just for the record, you may not agree with everything I bring up, or perhaps I may miss something that you think is worth discussing, so please, let me know what you make of my opinions down in the comments below. I'd love to read what you all have to say. Alright, the way we'll do this is we'll go through every book and bring up anything unrealistic and discuss its realness. Well, maybe not everything because some stuff is so blatant that I wouldn't really know what to say about it in order to make a worthwhile discussion. The first thing from the first book is the cheese. Now, I guess this one isn't too far off from what could happen in reality. Maybe there was a piece of cheese that was never seen for the longest time and it just happened to grow moldy and nasty, and by the time someone noticed, no one wanted to touch it. My thing is, from the illustrations Greg drew, it looks like it's smack dab in the middle of a play area, so how did it go unclean for so long? At least the movie showed it off to the side. That made it more believable. The school messing with Greg's comic is believable for the most part, but I don't know why the school decided to go with Greg's comic only for them to completely modify it. Like, why not just choose one of the other comics that didn't have to be edited? I don't know, that's weird. Just for the record, I understood why they edited the comic. It was a little demeaning to the not-so-smart students, but again, why take the extra step when the other comics didn't need to be changed at all? Maybe Greg didn't win at all, but wanted to look good in his first entry, so he made that part up and announced his retirement shortly after to not have to keep up with the lie. The apple fight at the end of the Wizard of Oz play could have happened, but maybe not the way Greg described it. Perhaps things did get a little out of hand, but not as chaotic as shown in the book. But then again, this is middle schoolers we're talking about, so again, it could have happened. Greg describes a story where, in Spanish class, he accidentally stumbled forward after trying to act out his sentence, leaving a hole in the wall. Either that wall is incredibly soft, or Greg's bum is rather tough. I wonder. I guess if it's a small hole, that could be believable. People can punch holes in walls, so I guess a full force strike from someone's butt could maybe do it. So the whole 100 years ago poem is kinda odd. Like, we know Rodrick isn't exactly the smartest, but did you really think a half-assed poem was gonna get him a passing grade for a history project? I have a feeling Rodrick lied about having his actual past assignment and just gave Greg a BS replacement that he decided to not look over because Rodrick knew Greg was going to take it due to his desperation. Feeling ashamed of his foolishness, Greg explained that, while he was dumb for not double-checking, Rodrick was also stupid for turning in such a poorly written assignment. Speaking of making Rodrick look bad, just a story about the Heffleys turning in an old photo of Rodrick for his high school yearbook, and the photo accidentally getting printed in the book, as if the high school really thought that was a normal teenage boy in their system. Considering Greg said he couldn't find a copy of that yearbook, I think it could be safely assumed no such thing ever happened. I never understood the whole spreading Greg's embarrassing story thing. So Rodrick tells his friends the story, then they tell their younger siblings, who would then harass Greg at school over the tale. What exactly would the older siblings get out of the situation? Why would they tell their younger siblings? It makes sense why Rodrick spreads the story. he wants people to bully Greg because of the loaded diaper incident, but why would Roderick's friends care enough to tell their siblings? They get nothing out of Greg's humiliation, do they? I guess they just want to share a funny story to their kin, but still, that's something I never really thought about until now. I think the craziest thing that happened in The Last Straw is probably the ending where Greg's hanging on the tree with his underwear showing, which allowed for Frank to get out of humiliating himself in front of others, which convinced him not to send Greg to Spag Union. I'm not saying it's impossible, but maybe such a threat was never real, but Greg didn't want this journal to get boring, so he made up that conflict and then resolved it with the aforementioned story. If you really wanted to go there, this story is quite different in the online version where Greg falls into a wasp nest and then he's rescued by his dad, so maybe Greg thought that version of the story was too crazy and toned it down with this more refined version in The Last Straw. The only other thing I can think of for The Last Straw is the soccer story where Greg suggests they name themselves Twisted Wizard, only to be disregarded as the team decides to choose Red Sox instead, a baseball team. I have a feeling Greg was just mad about the other boys not liking his name, so in order to get back at them, he decided to make them look stupid in his journal. Good job, Greg. You really got him there. In Dog Days, Greg mentions that Manny has a lot of money thanks to the swear jar, but such a thing is never brought up again. Like, if Manny does have a lot of money, one would think Greg would bring up the kind of things Manny buys a lot, especially considering Greg has made plenty of money-making schemes too. So, does Manny just not buy stuff at all? I don't think he would, considering he's 3 years old. I'm sure he would be buying things left and right if this story is to be believed. In The Ugly Truth, Greg tells us the kid that did the commercials for Peachy Breeze ice cream kept doing them until he was a teenager ridden with acne, which is rather questionable. Advertisers completely understand the importance of a good-looking face for their product, so they probably would have recast the kid way before he even became a tween. Either that, or they could have gotten a new kid for every commercial. That probably would have been cheaper because, with a legacy actor, they usually demand more and more to continue doing the same role. Greg's grandpa comes to watch over Greg while Susan and Frank were on vacation, and he still uses the babysitting book from when they were just kids. I know Grandpa's a little senile, but does he really believe that book is appropriate for someone Greg's age? Did he use a similar book when he was raising his children, or did Susan never tell Grandpa to stop using the book because the boys had gotten old enough to where they don't need to be constantly checked on? The only other thing I could think of from The Ugly Truth was the devil egg story where Greg put the delicacy in the Snella's houseplant, and they moved houses because they couldn't get rid of the smell of rotting eggs. Like, how in the world did they not check the plant? Not to mention, the plant may have died because of that infliction. In Cabin Fever, Greg asked Coach Underwood if he could just do sit-ups as homework instead of doing them in gym class. Coach agrees, but under the condition that Greg can prove he did them when he comes back the next day. The next day, Greg makes a fake six-pack out of his mom's mascara to make it seem like he did the exercise. First of all, I don't know of any coach that would let a student do an exercise at home, as long as they bring in evidence. I guess nowadays it'd be more viable considering they could just record themselves with their phone, but still, I'm pretty sure the coach would just tell them to do that right then and there. In any case, there's no way Coach was convinced by Greg's trick because another sit-ups will not magically create a six-pack for anybody. To be fair, Greg doesn't say that Coach was convinced, but what was he thinking? It's mentioned that the Heffley's photo albums are full of random strangers because Susan will often cut in front of lines at certain events and take pictures of random people rather than her kids or husband due to her impatience. However, every time we've seen Greg's depictions of family photos, they always include his actual family members and not random characters. Not to mention, the picture Greg draws for that page doesn't have a picture from a photo book, rather a third-person view of Susan taking a picture of a random kid, which is just a rendition of what Susan did. During the Secret Santa story, the teacher accidentally reveals Greg as the gifter for his present, as if she wouldn't stop herself after reading the "From Your Secret Santa" part. Is she stupid? Not to mention, Susan wrote down Greg's name on the tag despite it being a Secret Santa gift, so regardless, if that tag was still on there by the time the student got it, he would have known. What a conniption. Finally, there's the ending where Manny shuts off all the electricity to the house except to his room because to him, it was every man for himself after a certain point. I find it hard to believe Susan didn't check up on her 3-year-old son not once during the storm to feed him or any other things mothers do for their children. I know Susan may not be the best mom ever, but did she really neglect such a basic motherly duty? Not to mention, Manny could reach and read the circuit breaker? Okay, so the third wheel starts off with Greg telling us he remembers being in his mother's womb, which is scientifically impossible, The brain hasn't been developed enough to the point of having memory at that stage in pregnancy. There really is no debate about this or whether or not this is exaggerated. It's just straight up lies. The rest of the things in this section are going to seem silly by comparison, but here goes. The no tie policy at Corny's. I guess something like that could exist, but I don't know, that doesn't necessarily seem legal. That's destruction of someone's property as soon as they walk through the door of a place that's open to the public without any sort of warning. Sure, there's the no tie board, but if you don't see that immediately, the server may just clip your shit without much explanation. The whole toilet paper thing is odd. Like, I know schools don't provide the best toilet paper around, but is it that much of an issue that students vote a class president in solely based on the bathroom material? Not to mention, once students are able to bring in their own toilet paper, they hoard it in their locker and start fights over it. Well, the second part I could see, but seriously, does the toilet paper at school hurt their anus so much that it's such an issue? Not to mention, how often do these kids use the school bathroom so much that toilet paper is an issue in the first place? I have IBD, and I used the bathroom a total of like 5 times the entire time I was in high school. That place was only for emergencies. In this book, Greg mentions he used to sell his drawings at family events until his relatives stopped buying them. But when Manny did the same thing, people were buying them like crazy, despite the fact there was no effort in Manny's pictures. I know that we like to duke on Manny around here, but come on, who in the hell is buying this? There's the reverse psychology story where Greg intentionally says he doesn't want a cell phone, only to receive one that same night, which was the plan all along, but really, Susan and Frank had a conversation right then and there and gave Greg a phone without consoling him first. I know Greg would have obviously said yes, but still, that seemed like a rather hasty decision based on such a small comment. Again, I know Susan isn't the best mom, but considering how anti-technology she can be, seems out of character. During Greg's geography quiz, the teacher, at first, somehow doesn't see that he's using the magic 8-ball for answers. Not that it did him any good, but still, in order to use the 8-ball, Greg has to shake it, which is not a subtle gesture, especially in that Snuggie he was wearing. One of the previous school projects happened to be decoding the human genome, which seems rather ambitious for a middle schooler. I certainly wouldn't have had a clue as to how to go about such a thing when I was that young. Of course, it could just be a simplified version of the importance behind the scientific concept, because it'd be really ridiculous to believe something that took so many people to do was thoroughly explained by a middle schooler. So at the end of the book, Greg is certain that the Easter egg he found had Mima's ring, which is worth a lot of money, but like a lot of other Wimpy Kid endings, such a thing is never mentioned again. Did Greg not have a good conclusion for this journal that he made up that story, or did Greg find an Easter egg that he thought was Mima's ring, or for it to be like a rock or something? It wouldn't be that surprising to me considering Greg did say that she put some absurd stuff in those eggs in her later years. So the long haul introduced the pig character, but we won't talk about his shenanigans until next entry because that's kind of where the crazy stuff with that swine starts. So let's just talk about what happened in the long haul for now. So the way the Heffleys got the pig was Manny perfectly guessed the weight of the big pig, which I guess isn't too ridiculous, but not exactly realistic. I will say though, and yes, I know, I'm not really supposed to bring this up, I do like how the long haul movie did this scene. Manny just said 456, which is totally something a 3-year-old would blurt out when asked about how much something weighs. Anyways, the fair just gives away a baby pig and won't take no for an answer. First of all, from what I know, in certain states, people need a permit or some kind of license in order to own a pig, so even if the state the fair is in doesn't require such a thing, the winner could be someone from out of state where pigs need a permit, which would make taking the pig back home illegal. We know Greg was totally against the idea of owning the pig, so in order to really put the blame on the county fair, he painted them as the bad guy, which they could very well have been. Okay, so I want to make it clear. I am not a native or a fluent Spanish speaker, but the Tango Hamburgers page has always bothered me. So on this page, Susan translates Tengo hambre, which means I'm hungry in Spanish, to Tango Hamburgers. The Tengo part I understand. Tengo and Tango sound similar, but hambre and hamburger, that I don't understand. The H isn't pronounced in hambre. If it was, I can see how she translated it to hamburger because it would sound like hambre, but it's not, so something's fishy about this story. While we're here, the ending where Manny speaks fluent Spanish is definitely lies. There's no way on earth that a person could speak fluent Spanish after only listening to those learning CDs with no practice, especially for a 3-year-old. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the pig in this book. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of Wimpy Kid fans are already aware of this critter, but The pig from the long haul returned in old school, and that boy was doing things like walking on 2 feet, wearing pants, and leaving the house to do God knows what. As you may know, pigs can't walk on 2 feet, at least not as their primary method of locomotion because their body would not allow for such a thing, and it somehow has a social life. We're introduced to Fru in old school, a really smart young kid that helps Greg out with his homework and other class assignments. This kid is never mentioned again, nor is Greg getting placed in harder classes because of Fru. It's such a weird short story that doesn't really do much for this book. Again, it could be a case of Greg trying to spice things up with crazy stories and to drag out the length of his journals. You know, I always wondered if the lemonade stand Greg had was simply just not working because people kept walking by or there was nothing appealing about their lemonade, so he decided to create a story where he could blame his failure on a kid across the block with the superior beverage station. There's that whole story where Greg loses the toothpaste cap in his sink and that leads to him neutraling the family car into a ditch. Yeah, quite the jump there. If we consider this a lie, I guess something really embarrassing happened that led Greg to wanting to take the camping trip, or perhaps Greg simply changed his mind and wanted to go on the trip but didn't want to admit that, so he made up that story to make this journal more interesting. There's the stew that has the scraps of every piece of untouched food by the kids at the camp. Like, I get the idea, but there's no way a stew like that is still around if we believe Greg's description. That would be dangerous to kids with allergies, and some foods really shouldn't touch each other due to cross-contamination, or the food could simply just rot. Greg gets asked by a college girl if he could tutor her because he looks smart. So, just because someone reads books, they look smart. And to top it all off, Greg actually helped this girl out by studying material he's never seen before, or at least I don't think he has. There's no way Greg was able to learn so much about psychology in one night. Certainly not enough to help a college student pass an exam because, remember, Greg is a middle schooler, and not a very bright one at that. Well, of course, there's the ending where the birds attack the Heffley house, which leads to Rowley stuck in a tree, shirtless with a shower cap, using Manny's toy, which leads to him being interviewed by news stations all across the country, which is never mentioned again. You know, these stories would be more believable if Greg had more follow-through with them. It seems a lot of endings are just straight up disregarded, even if it seemed like they had large significance. Also, I know Double Down has a good amount of other unbelievable stuff, but none of them are really that big for me to discuss or mention because it would just be me mentioning the event and going, yeah, there's no way, instead of giving it somewhat of an explanation. There's a monkey at the resort's bar that was exiled from his tribe, so he found the bar and stayed there for some time. I know primates are wired to be social, but I'm not exactly sure monkeys would venture to a human-ridden area rather than another part of the island where another monkey population could be. Not to mention, somehow he can stomach whatever the bartender gives him. Not exactly sure monkeys can digest alcohol or whatever it is given to him without getting the runs, but hey, who knows? I got curious about this question and looked it up, and according to Robert Sanders, chimps can consume 14 grams of ethanol daily just fine, so maybe monkeys can do it too. Fish have a similar mechanism where they turn lactic acid into ethanol, though we don't know if that gets them drunk or not. There's a teenager in this book named Rodrigo, and he looks quite similar to Rodrick, so there's been questions by the Wimpy Kid community on why this person looks so close to Greg's brother, or if he was even real in the first place. Maybe Greg tried to remember this person, but couldn't for the life of him, so he just came up with whatever to tell the story without some weird faceless character. The Meltdown's whole plot of the turf war between the two parts of Surrey Street is definitely one of the most unrealistic parts of this book. After all, why exactly do they hate each other? Is everyone on that damn street so territorial that even if close neighbors want to step foot on their quote-unquote soil that they get upset? I can understand getting territorial if someone steps on your yard, and not so much if they're just passing by on the street or sidewalk. This of course leads to the strategic planning of weaponry between both sides. It just gets ridiculous. Wrecking Ball has the whole fiasco about the craziness that happened to the house during construction, all of which are just kind of small events that I don't think add up to warrant a section where I mention all of them. Rather, I want to focus on the fact that Manny, a 3-year-old kid, built an entire house out of, well, I don't even know. Where did he get his materials from? Like, in what universe does Greg think readers would have believed his younger brother built a stable piece of infrastructure all by himself? It's not like he made this story up for clout or to look cool because it's not about him, so what was the point of this story? Other than that, there's the perfect house they find, and the family just so happen to love everything about the Heffley house, but I don't think there's much to talk about there, so we're just gonna move on. As I was writing the script, I remembered a loaded diaper subreddit post where the user pointed out Greg mentions he didn't know door hinges could be taken off with a screwdriver in this book. It's hard to believe because he did such a thing in Rodrick Rules where he and his brother unscrewed the bathroom door and replaced it with another one due to the original one having graffiti. There's a theory that mentions not all the books take place in order, with some being about a particular event or events during, say, a specific quarter during Greg's middle school years. But he threw in other small things to make sure it would fit an entire journal, and what we just discussed would be a pretty good piece of evidence to support that theory. The Deep End is another one of those books that has some small things that I just don't think are worth talking about. I think really the only thing worth discussing is the ending where the Heffley's RV serves as a bridge for the campers to leave, and that boy was so stable, everybody was able to leave without someone getting thrown overboard. I guess if everybody was driving over it slowly, then maybe it could have worked, but everybody was in a rush to get out of there, so I doubt it. Not to mention, people brought their own RVs, boats, and trucks, all of which would have no doubt done a number on the RV and would have caused it to either move or sink, so yeah, that's this book's most ridiculous point. You know, I'm not exactly sure what to bring up with Big Shot. Like with the Deep End, there's some small stuff that's not worth commenting. And the only thing I can think of is the ending where Greg makes the trick shot, but even then, I guess it could have happened, and not much happens with that ending anyway, so I think we'll just skip this one. With Diaper Overload, how likely was it that not only did the 4 members of Metallic Chihuahua happen to be at that small local concert, but after they recognized each other, they decided to play one last time? Don't they all hate each other? How was it that they were in the same area as the Heffleys? Wouldn't they have moved away from that area if they knew their band members were there? I could kind of understand them playing a show after seeing each other though. The fans were hyping them up and they wanted to please them, so they gave them some good old rock and roll. Moving on to No Brainer, this entire book is so crazy. It's like every other page there's something so out of this world that for this section, I'm just going to mention every single thing that I noted as I went through this book again with no explanation because I don't think any of them need elaboration. Here goes. Mr. Layton not knowing Latin and essentially making up a fake language for his students. Animals without clothes covered up in the library's books. High Flyers Club where the best students get crazy ass privileges. Greg had to sit on the heater in a classroom due to limited seats. Kids start digging up school property, which leads to someone digging straight to Greg's locker. Mr. Rask's bathroom pass is a skeleton. Chris Kodiak started a barbershop in the bathroom. Okay, maybe that one's not so bad. Ruby Burr sharpens pencils with her ears. A room full of bees. All the sponsors Greg's school takes for money. Greg becomes the principal for a day, which entails him doing everything, and I mean everything that a principal would do. Entire ass flood in the hallways. All the staff treating Greg like he's the actual principal. Greg's average intelligence is genius level in his new school. And last but not least, that damn cleaning robot that not only thinks it's a human, but becomes the principal at the end of the book. I know I said I was going to avoid smaller things to talk about, and I just listed a bunch of smaller things that only last for a page or two, but there was so much stuff in this book that it all just built up and created for such a ridiculous Wimpy Kid book. Also, Mr. Gupta looks different in this book. I wonder why. Maybe it was another male relative of his. I don't know. Okay, let's open up Hot Messes Lies, and that'll be our last stop because I can't think of much with Party Pooper. Well, if I'm being honest, really the only thing I want to discuss was Dazzle. Just like the pig, Dazzle thinks they're a human for some reason, and apparently it can understand English and work a smartphone. It's also so popular that people immediately recognize her in public and were able to track her down based on Greg's profile picture. I don't remember any internet dog being that popular ever. Not Doge, not Mishka, not Cheems, nobody. So that's why Dazzle's here. Well, that's all Greg's lies or exaggerations I wanted to bring up. All in all, I counted about 45 lies or exaggerations that were worth discussing. Remember, I left out some smaller ones that I didn't have much to commentate on, and I counted No Brainer as one big fat lie considering how much small stuff was so unrealistic. I guess 45 isn't that bad of a number considering there's 20 books now, and some were fairly believable, so, you know, maybe Greg isn't that much of an unreliable narrator as we once thought. It's odd to think how much crazier things got in later books considering a lot of them consist of Greg going on and on about a certain topic rather than just quickly writing down his thoughts about what happened during the day or last few days. Despite all of his ramblings, the later entries still had about as much lies and exaggerations as the older entries, so make of that what you will. I think one of the crazier things about the books is that Greg has so many lucky opportunities in his life, but none of them ever follow through or lead to fortune. Like, he supposedly found Mima's ring, but it was never mentioned again, or even in the latest entry, Party Pooper, where Greg finally gets that rare trading card, only for it to be worthless a few days later. It made me realize another thing that really separates the newer books from the older entries. In the first couple of entries, it seemed to be the opposite of his current predicaments. Like, Greg would find himself in deep trouble, but he always found himself out of having to face severe consequences. In Rodrick Rules, the embarrassing story was changed so many times through the game of telephone. Greg wasn't bullied for what he actually did. In The Last Straw, Greg got out of going to Spag Union by saving his dad from humiliation. Or in Cabin Fever, the Heffleys didn't actually lose power, Manny just turned off parts of the circuit breaker. After a certain point, it would always seem as though Greg caught some kind of lucky break, only for the end of the story to completely reverse Greg's fate. Perhaps Greg thought his fans would notice how many times Greg got himself out of major trouble, so he changed every scenario to not benefit him, as to not seem too lucky, or like his life was miracle after miracle. I know I mentioned this in a previous video, but there's a theory that the live action movies are exactly what happened in the Wimpy Kid universe, considering they're way more realistic, and since every character ages and develops, unlike the books. I've always liked that theory because of that. The first 3 live action movies didn't copy everything from the books. The filmmakers changed certain events where appropriate to either fit in better with the story or comedy, but they also helped the movie feel more grounded. There's also the online series that had beta versions of the stories told in the books, and stories that haven't showed up yet in the retail releases. So perhaps the changed stories are Greg revising the past to make himself look better, or make things more interesting. And the stories that haven't been retold are stuck in limbo because Greg doesn't know what to do with them yet. Well, that's all the ramblings I have about Wimpy Kid for now. Thanks for watching, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, I hope you have a good day.